The road hadn't changed, but I had. It cut through the valley like a scar, narrow, pale, and half swallowed by weeds. Fog hugged the ground so tightly it looked like the earth itself was breathing. My headlights carved 2 weak tunnels through the mist as I slowed down, every bump in the gravel sounding louder than it should. I hadn't driven this road in almost 20 years, but my hands still knew where to turn. The steering wheel felt heavier, like it knew this wasn't just a visit. This was a return. I rolled the window down and the smell hit me instantly. Wet dirt, pine needles, something metallic from the creek nearby. The same smell I remembered from childhood mornings when my grandfather would wake me up before sunrise and say, "If you want to see the valley breathe, you gotta be here before the sun." Back then, the valley felt endless. A bowl of green wrapped in hills, quiet enough that your own footsteps sounded rude. Now, as my car crawled forward, the silence felt tense instead of peaceful. Like something was waiting. The gate came into view slowly, emerging from the fog like a rib sticking out of the earth. Old wood. Crooked hinges. The faded warning sign still nailed to the center, private road, though the paint had peeled so badly you could barely read it anymore. I eased off the gas and stopped just short of it, engine idling, heart doing that stupid thing where it beats faster for no logical reason. I sat there longer than I meant to. Part of me expected the gate to open on its own, like it always had. My grandfather never locked it. He said locks were for people who didn't trust their land. But now a thick metal chain wrapped around it, shiny and new against the gray wood. A cheap padlock dangled from the loop like a challenge. I opened the car door and stepped out into the cold. The fog beaded on my jacket instantly. Somewhere deeper in the valley, a bird called out and then went quiet. I walked closer to the gate, running my fingers over the wood. The grain felt rougher than I remembered, like time itself had taken a file to it. That's when I heard her. "Hey!" The voice cut through the fog like a crack of glass. I turned, squinting into the mist. At first, all I could see was a shadow moving fast, heels crunching against gravel with sharp, angry rhythm. Then she broke through the fog fully, blonde hair pulled tight, arms folded like weapons, a clipboard tucked under one arm like it was part of her body. She didn't wave. She didn't ask who I was. She didn't even slow down. The first thing she said wasn't hello. It was, "You don't belong here." Her eyes flicked from my car to my boots to the gate like she was already building a case against me in her head. I noticed the way she stood, feet planted wide, shoulders back, like this stretch of dirt was her personal stage. "I'm just opening the gate," I said, keeping my voice even. She laughed once. Sharp. Fake. "No, you're not." I pointed at the lock. "I've got the key." She stepped closer. Too close. Close enough that I could smell her perfume cutting through the damp air. "This is HOA-controlled property. You can't just drive in here because you feel like it." HOA. The word landed wrong in this place, like graffiti on a gravestone. "I own a cabin up the road," I said. "I'm going to it." She tilted her head, slow and theatrical. "No, you don't." The fog swirled around us, the valley holding its breath. I could hear my own pulse in my ears. Somewhere behind her, the road disappeared into white, like the world ended 10 feet away. "I've lived here 12 years, she continued. "I know every owner. And you are not one of them." I glanced past her, down the road that curved into memory, past where the creek crossed under a wooden bridge, past where the trees opened up into a clearing with a crooked porch and a rusted wind chime. "I inherited it," I said. She snorted. "Sure you did." The way she said it, like inheritance, was a punchline. She flipped her clipboard around and started pointing at lines I couldn't see. "This valley is under HOA jurisdiction. All access is restricted to registered residents. You're trespassing." The word hit harder than it should have. Trespassing. On land where I'd learned to fish. On land where my grandfather had buried his first dog under an oak tree. On land where his boots were probably still sitting by the cabin door, dusty and waiting. I looked at the chain again. The lock glinted like it was proud of itself. "I have paperwork," I said. "The deed." Her smile widened, thin and dangerous. "Then show it to the board." "Not to me, and not by standing here like you own the place." I felt something hot rise up in my chest, but I swallowed it. Getting angry was what she wanted. People like her thrived on it. "I'm not leaving," I said. She stepped back and raised her phone. "Then I'll call this in." I watched her tap the screen, her mouth already forming words for whoever picked up. "Yes, this is the valley entrance. There's a man here trying to force access. He claims to own property." "No. I don't recognize him." "Yes, I believe he's trespassing." She ended the call and folded her arms again. "You should go," she said. "Before this gets embarrassing." I stared at the gate, then at the road behind me, then at her. The fog shifted, revealing a little more of the valley beyond the gate. Just enough for me to see the dark line of trees where my grandfather's cabin waited. The place he'd built with his own hands. The place he'd written into his will with ink so faded it almost looked like pencil. I remembered the last time I'd stood here, his hand on my shoulder, his voice rough with age. "Don't let anyone tell you this isn't yours someday." I looked back at her. "I'm not trespassing," I said quietly. She raised an eyebrow. "Then what are you doing?" "I'm coming home." For a second, something flickered across her face, confusion maybe, or annoyance that I wasn't playing my part as the scared outsider. Then it hardened again. "You people always say that," she muttered. "You people?" I asked. "Claimers, drifters, inheritors. Whatever story you've got." My fingers tightened around the key in my pocket. "I can prove it," I said. She waved a hand. "I've heard that before." A wind pushed through the valley, lifting the fog just enough to reveal the slope of the hills and the line of the road cutting deeper inside. It felt like the land itself was leaning in to listen. She told me I was trespassing, I thought, standing there with my grandfather's valley behind a chain and a stranger in front of me, on land my grandfather died for. And in that moment, with the fog curling around her legs and the gate locked between us, I realized this wasn't just about a road. It was about who got to say what belonged to who. And she was about to find out. She stepped directly in front of my car before I could even turn the engine off. I tapped the brakes, the hood dipping slightly as the tires crunched on gravel. Her reflection warped across my windshield, arms out wide, clipboard pressed to her chest like a shield. Hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. For a second, I thought she might actually plant her feet against the bumper. That was how determined she looked. "Stop," she snapped, slapping her palm against the hood. The sound echoed too loudly in the quiet valley. It felt wrong, like clapping in a church. "I already stopped," I said, keeping my hands visible on the steering wheel. She leaned forward, peering through the glass, as if I were a suspicious package. "Turn the engine off." I did. The sudden silence made everything sharper. The rustle of leaves, the distant trickle of water, her breathing. She straightened up and waved the clipboard at me like a badge. "This is private HOA land. You cannot drive any farther." I opened my door slowly and stepped out. Cold air rushed in, and with it the smell of pine and damp soil. She immediately moved sideways to block my path, positioning herself between me and the gate like she was guarding a border. "I'm going to my cabin," I said. "It's up the road." Her laugh was quick and cruel. "No, it's not." I blinked. "Excuse me?" "There is no cabin registered to you in Indication Valley," she said, tapping her papers with a pen. "I manage access here. I know who belongs and who doesn't." Her tone made the word belong sound like a threat. "I inherited it," I said. "My grandfather's place." She raised her eyebrows dramatically. "Oh, did you now, yes?" "Well, your grandfather isn't on the HOA roster," she said, "which means neither are you." I felt something twist in my chest. "This land predates your HOA." She scoffed. "Everything here is HOA controlled. We have bylaws, rules, surveys. You can't just drive into a community because you feel nostalgic." "I'm not visiting a community," I said. "I'm accessing my property." She flipped the clipboard around and shoved it toward me, the paper inches from my face. See this? These are violation forms. Unauthorized access is a finable offense. I stepped back slightly, forcing her to lower it. You're blocking my car, I said calmly. Can you move? No, she said. You're trespassing. The word again, like she enjoyed saying it. I looked past her at the road winding into the fog. I grew up here. She laughed harder this time. Oh, please. Everyone has a story. That doesn't make it yours. I have a deed. Of course you do. She crossed her arms and shifted her weight onto one hip. Look, I don't know what your angle is, but this little act isn't working. We've had people try this before. Fake heirs. Old maps. Sob stories. I'm not acting, I said. My grandfather built the cabin himself. She tilted her head. Name? My grandfather? Yes, I told her. She tapped something into her phone and waited, lips pursed. Then she shook her head slowly. Nope. Doesn't exist. He existed, I said. Not in HOA records, she replied. Which is what matters. Something about the way she said that, like a piece of paper mattered more than a lifetime, made my jaw tighten. You don't get to decide who owns land, I said. She smiled thinly. Actually, I do. That's literally my job. She waved her papers again. This valley is private HOA land. You can't enter without authorization. I glanced at the chain on the gate. Since when? Since before you showed up, she said. And since you clearly aren't on the list, you need to turn around. I'm not turning around. Her eyes narrowed. Then I will issue a citation. For what? Attempted trespass. Obstruction of access. Harassment. Harassment? I repeated. You ran up to my car. She ignored that. And if you don't leave, I'll have your vehicle towed. To where? Off private property, she said, gesturing vaguely behind me. I pictured a tow truck trying to navigate this narrow road and almost laughed, but her face was dead serious. You can't tow my car for trying to go to my own cabin, I said. She leaned closer, her voice dropping. Watch me. A gust of wind pushed fog around us, revealing more of the valley, trees rising like dark walls on either side of the road. It felt like the land itself was listening. I own a cabin here, I repeated. It's on the east side of the creek. She shook her head. There is no cabin there. There is. There was, she corrected. Probably torn down years ago. It wasn't. She sighed like I was a child refusing to accept bedtime. Sir, you need to understand something. I've lived here 12 years. I know every owner. You are not one of them. The line landed heavy. 12 years. My grandfather had owned this valley for 40. I wasn't here, I said. I was away. Well, this isn't a hotel. She replied. You don't check in when it suits you. I came back because he died. Her mouth tightened for a split second. Then she shrugged. People die all the time. The cruelty of it surprised me. I have the deed, I said again. Then bring it to the board meeting, she said. On Tuesday. I'm not waiting until Tuesday to access my property. She smirked. Then you're choosing to break the rules. I'm choosing to go home. She stepped back in front of the car, arms wide. Not happening. The fog thinned just enough that I could see the line of the road where it curved out of sight. Somewhere up there was the cabin. The porch. The wind chime. The place where my grandfather had taught me to split wood and fry trout. And between me and it stood a woman with a clipboard. I'm not asking your permission, I said. She gasped like I'd insulted her personally. You will respect the hoe. Your hoe didn't buy this land. Your story doesn't matter, she snapped. Paper does. I have paper. Then produce it. It's in my car. Then go get it. You're blocking the door. She didn't move. Step aside, I said. No. I took a breath and leaned against my car, folding my arms. Then we're at a standstill. She looked annoyed that I wasn't panicking. I can call this in. Call whoever you want. She pulled out her phone again. Good. I will. She spoke loudly, making sure I heard every word. Yes, I have an individual attempting unauthorized access to HOA-controlled valley property. He claims inheritance. No, I don't believe him. She hung up and smiled at me. Help is on the way. From the HOA? I asked. From people who handle this, she said. I glanced around. There's no one else here. There will be. The wind rustled the trees. Somewhere, a bird took off, wings beating loud in the quiet. I'm not leaving, I said. You should, she replied. Before this gets worse. Worse how? She shrugged. Fines, towing, maybe police. For trying to reach my own cabin? For trespassing. Again, that word. I looked at the ground, at the gravel pressed into the dirt that had once been my grandfather's driveway. You locked the gate, I said. For security. You chained a public road. It's not public. It was before your hoe showed up. She rolled her eyes. Everything evolves. So does ownership, I said. She scoffed. Not without our approval. The arrogance of it hit me then. Not loud, but heavy. Like she truly believed the valley existed because of her paperwork. I have memories here, I said. Memories don't count. I have legal documents. Show them to the board. I have keys. She laughed at that. Keys to what? A fantasy? I reached into my pocket and pulled out the key ring. Old brass. Worn smooth by years of use. I held it up. Her eyes flicked to it, unimpressed. That proves nothing. It opens the cabin. There is no cabin. There is... You're lying. I'm not. She shook her head slowly. You people always think emotion beats rules. What do you mean, you people? She hesitated, then waved it off. Outsiders. Claimants. People who think land belongs to them because of stories. My grandfather died here, I said quietly. Then he should have joined the hoe, she replied. The cruelty of that statement sat between us like a rock. I stared at her. She stared back. Fog drifted around her legs. The valley felt ancient and patient, like it had seen 1,000 arguments like this and didn't care. I'm staying, I said. She planted her feet. So am I. We stood there, locked in place. Two humans arguing over dirt and trees and lines on a map. She said, I've lived here 12 years. I know every owner. You are not one of them. And in that moment, with her body blocking my car and her papers claiming my grandfather's valley, I knew this wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a challenge. And one of us was about to be proven wrong. I remember the first time I saw the valley in its entirety, though I was barely 8 years old. My grandfather had taken me by the hand and led me through that very road, the same gravel crunching under our boots that I now heard again, decades later. Back then, everything felt enormous. The rolling hills that surrounded us, the dense clusters of trees that swayed like they were alive, and the creek that cut through the valley like a silver ribbon, reflecting the morning sun. He was always in motion, always talking, but never in a hurry. Every step he took seemed measured, deliberate, as if he was showing me not just the land, but the story it carried. He bought this valley when most people his age were thinking about retirement, about quieting down. But he had a vision that was only partially understood by the neighbors back then, many of whom thought he was eccentric, even foolish, for wanting to claim so much rugged land as his own. He would stand at the crest of a hill, hands on his hips, eyes scanning the horizon, and say things like, "This is more than soil and trees. This is a legacy, a breathing, living thing that will outlast both of us." I didn't understand the weight of those words as a child, but I felt them nonetheless. There was pride in his voice, and there was hope. Every summer, we would return to the valley, often driving for hours along roads that twisted through mountains and forests, until finally the air would change, cleaner, colder, sharper. I could feel it in my lungs, my skin. And every time we arrived at the little cabin he had built with his own hands, I would be overwhelmed by a sense of belonging, a sense that this was where we were meant to be, even if only for a few days. He taught me to recognize the sounds of the land, the rustle of deer in the underbrush, the call of birds I had never seen before, the whisper of the wind through the pines. These weren't just lessons in survival. They were lessons in appreciation, in reverence for what he had created and preserved. I remember the cabin vividly. Small, sturdy, and slightly crooked in all the right places, as if it had grown with the land rather than being imposed upon it. The porch creaked under our weight, and the wind chime hanging by the door would tinkle in harmony with the breeze, creating a music that felt like it belonged only to us. He had furnished it simply, leaving space for imagination and for the stories we would invent in the evenings as the sun dipped behind the hills. Nights were spent around the fire pit, with its ring of stones carefully arranged, roasting marshmallows, and listening to him tell tales of how he had first mapped the valley, how he had measured the land, staked it, and fought for every inch of it when no one else could see its value. As a child, those stories felt magical, almost unreal. The idea that a single person could claim a valley and protect it seemed like a superpower. But now, standing here decades later, I realize it was something even more profound. It was a responsibility. And it had been passed down to me. When he passed away, it was sudden, though not unexpected in the way life prepares you for such losses. I had been away in college, wrapped up in the trivialities of city life. But when I received the call, I felt as though the valley itself had shifted beneath my feet. The grief was complicated. There was sorrow. Yes. But also a strange weight of duty settling onto my shoulders. The valley was no longer just his. It was mine now. And with that inheritance came a flood of memories, of summers and winters, of every scraped knee, every fish caught, every story told by the fire, every night spent staring at stars that felt impossibly close, because there was no city to obscure them. I could remember him walking me along the creek, crouching down to show me the way the water carved tiny channels through the sand and rocks. "See this?" he would ask. "It's patient. It shapes the land, little by little. You have to be the same. Patient, persistent. Respect the land, and it will respect you." I had carried those lessons into adulthood, often forgetting their source. Until now, there were the moments of triumph, too. I remembered the day we built the small wooden bridge over the creek so we could reach the cabin more easily during spring rains. He had been insistent on precision, checking every plank, measuring twice, cutting once. My young hands had fumbled with the hammer, nails bending under the pressure, and he had only laughed, steadying my grip. That bridge had lasted decades, surviving storms and floods, a tangible symbol of his care and patience, and now it stood as a reminder that his work had not been in vain. I recalled the old oak tree at the edge of the meadow, under which he had planted wildflowers and small shrubs, claiming that the valley needed both the grandeur of trees and the humility of flowers. He had said, "Life is balance. The tall trees, the small blooms, the flowing water, they all matter. Never forget that." I had tried to live by that lesson in city life, but only now, surrounded by the raw vastness of the valley, did I truly understand what he had meant. The valley had been a sanctuary for our family. It had been a place where arguments faded into the background noise of nature, where laughter carried across hills and the setting sun painted the sky in colors too vivid to capture. It had been a place of discovery, of growth, of grounding. And now, with him gone, it became a responsibility, a charge to protect the land, to honor his legacy, and to assert a right that some might try to dispute. The cabin wasn't just property. It was a repository of memory, of life lived and shared. The kitchen counters bore the marks of years of cooking together, the wooden table still scratched from games and meals, the shelves heavy with books he had collected over decades. Every object told a story. Every corner held a memory. This wasn't just land to me. It was the last thing he left behind, and in many ways it was all that remained of him in a tangible, physical sense. Walking through the valley now, I could almost hear his voice in the rustling leaves and the trickle of the creek. He was there in the wind brushing past my face, in the way the trees seemed to lean slightly toward the cabin as if to welcome me home. I felt a surge of responsibility, but also a profound comfort. This land was mine to protect, mine to cherish, and in a way, mine to continue living through. The memories of our adventures came rushing back with such clarity that it was almost painful. I remembered building forts from fallen branches in the meadows, racing through the hills with him shouting after me, teaching me the constellations at night when the sky was dark enough to see them all. Each memory was a thread, weaving me into the fabric of the valley so completely that the confrontation at the gate, the locked road, the angry HOA representative, none of it could sever that connection. When I reached the cabin, I paused at the threshold, my hand brushing over the weathered wood, feeling the grooves my grandfather's hands had once traced. This was my inheritance, not just in the legal sense, but in every intangible way that mattered. The valley had been his classroom, his playground, his sanctuary. And now it was mine. The anger, the confrontation, the threat of fines and trespassing, these were challenges. Yes. But also confirmations that I needed to assert what was rightfully mine. I had inherited more than property. I had inherited the responsibility, the memories, the lessons, the love of a man who had poured decades of his life into this valley. This inheritance was heavy, but it was also a gift. Every step I took through the clearing, past the creek, toward the cabin, reminded me of who I was, where I came from, and the legacy I was sworn to uphold. Looking at the valley, breathing in the familiar scents, hearing the subtle symphony of life in motion, the creek, the wind, the rustle of leaves, I felt the weight of decades on my shoulders, but also the strength of a bond that could not be broken. This land was mine, in every sense that mattered, and while a stranger at a locked gate might try to deny it, might try to make me feel like an intruder, no paper, no rule, no threat could erase the truth. This wasn't just land to me. It was the last thing he left behind. Every tree, every stone, every ripple in the creek carried a piece of him. And now, it carried me forward, into the confrontation that awaited, into the assertion of my rightful claim, into the continuation of a legacy that had survived storms, time, and now, the incredulity of someone who refused to see what was plain. The valley was alive with memory, alive with purpose, alive with the quiet certainty that what belonged to my grandfather now belonged to me. And as I took a deep breath, feeling the wind against my face, I knew that I wasn't just inheriting property. I was inheriting life, history, and a duty that could not be ignored. Every step forward from here would be a testament to that bond, a testament to the man who had loved this valley enough to protect it for generations to come. And in that moment, standing at the edge of the clearing, looking toward the cabin that had been waiting for me for decades, I felt it clearly. I had returned not just to land, not just to a home, but to a lifetime of memories, responsibilities, and love that no confrontation, no hoe, no locked gate could ever take away. This valley was my inheritance. This valley was my grandfather's gift. This valley was my home. And no one, not Karen, not anyone else, was going to tell me otherwise. I stepped back from the gate, my heart pounding in a rhythm that matched the gravel under my boots. She had planted herself firmly in front of the car, clipboard clutched to her chest, and now, with a quick motion, she whipped out her phone. I didn't need to hear her words to know what was coming. She was calling for backup, HOA backup, police backup, whatever help she could summon to enforce her version of authority. "Hello?" She barked into the phone, her voice sharp and deliberate, designed to carry across the fog and the valley road. "Yes, there's a man here. He's refusing to leave private HOA property. He claims ownership of a cabin. No, I don't recognize him. Yes, he's insisting he has a deed. Fine, we need intervention immediately." Her words echoed in my ears, but I didn't move. I kept my hands in view, not out of fear, but to show her that I had no intention of making this a physical confrontation. My eyes scanned the road behind her, the mist swirling low over the ground, the way the trees leaned slightly toward us as if listening. There was a strange calm in the valley, almost mocking in contrast to the storm she was summoning. I watched her pace back and forth as she waited for a response, tapping her pen against the clipboard, muttering half-sentences to herself. The sound grated on me, but I forced myself to remain steady. I couldn't let her bait me into anger. This was bigger than a personal confrontation. This was about my grandfather's legacy, about what was legally and rightfully mine. After a few moments, she hung up and looked at me with a self-satisfied smirk. "They're on their way," she said. "You'll have to explain yourself to them now." I nodded slowly, letting her think she had the upper hand. "Sure," I said evenly. "I'll wait." The minutes dragged on, thick with fog and tension. Every rustle of leaves sounded like footsteps approaching. Every distant caw of a bird made my pulse jump. Then, finally, the sound of sirens, or rather the sound of one siren, cut through the fog. It was distant, hesitant, almost cautious, as if even the officers were unsure what they were stepping into. The valley, usually quiet and still, suddenly felt alive with expectation. A police vehicle emerged from the mist, headlights slicing through the gray like blades. The car slowed, pulling up beside us, and two officers stepped out. One tall man with a neatly trimmed mustache and a dark blue uniform scanned the scene, his eyes moving from me to Karen, then to the locked gate, then back again. His partner, slightly shorter and younger, had a notebook in hand, pen poised, watching intently. The tall officer approached, voice measured. "Sir, I'm Officer Daniels. Can I see some identification?" Karen was already talking, her voice rising, brimming with indignation. "He's refusing to leave private HOA property. He claims he owns a cabin. I've asked him to leave multiple times, and he's ignoring me." I held up my hands slightly, keeping my tone calm. "Officers, I understand the concern, but I'm not trespassing. I own a cabin here. It's legally mine." Officer Daniels raised an eyebrow. "Do you have proof of ownership?" I reached slowly into my coat pocket. "I do. The deed is in my glove box." Karen gasped, and the younger officer scribbled something in his notebook, glancing up at the older officer with a look of curiosity. Daniel's expression was unreadable. His eyes narrowed slightly as he processed what I said. "The deed is in the glove box?" he repeated. "Yes," I confirmed. "Would you like me to retrieve it?" Karen sputtered, her voice rising in pitch, almost panicked. "You don't need to. He's not authorized. He can't just." "Ma'am," Officer Daniels said sharply, holding up a hand. She froze, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. "Let him speak. Show us the document." I nodded and walked calmly to the car, retrieving the envelope containing the deed. The paper was thick, embossed with county seals, signatures, the faint scent of old ink. I handed it carefully to Officer Daniels. He took it, examining it with professional detachment, though I could see his eyes flick to the embossed seals, to the lines of text, and then to the map included. Karen stepped closer, attempting to peer over his shoulder. "That's fake. That can't be." "Ma'am," Daniels said again, his tone firm, "step back." She hesitated, then reluctantly moved aside. He unfolded the map, eyes scanning the plotted lines, the boundaries, the property markers. The younger officer leaned in, frowning slightly. "This shows the entire valley?" he asked, almost rhetorically. Daniels didn't answer immediately. He was checking something on a small device, presumably the county records, cross-referencing the information. I could feel Karen's tension mounting as she realized this wasn't going the way she'd hoped. Her hands trembled slightly, her face flushing red with frustration. After what felt like an eternity, Daniels looked up. "Sir," he said slowly, "this appears to be in order. You are the legal owner of this property, according to county records." Karen's face went white. She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried to speak again, but no words came out. She took a step back, almost as if the air had been knocked out of her. You mean," she stammered. Daniels interrupted, his voice calm but firm. Ma'am, as per these documents, this land belongs to him. Your HO does not have jurisdiction over it. The words were like a thunderclap. The fog seemed to thicken around her, her presence shrinking, powerless in the valley that had always been mine. She opened the clipboard, flipping frantically through papers as if sheer determination could overwrite the truth before her eyes. I, she began, then stopped, her confidence gone. The authority she had wielded moments ago, the threat of fines and towing, evaporated in an instant. I stayed calm, standing beside the officer, letting the moment unfold. There was a deep satisfaction in this quiet victory, the kind that doesn't need to be shouted. I didn't gloat. I didn't point. I simply let the truth speak. The younger officer handed the notebook back to Daniels. "Looks legit," he muttered. Daniels nodded, then turned to Karen. "You need to step back. This gentleman is allowed to access his property." Her lips pressed into a thin line, and she muttered something under her breath, clearly furious but entirely powerless. She glanced at the road ahead, then at the cabin in the distance, and I could see the realization settling in. The confrontation she had planned, the authority she had assumed, was meaningless here. I took a deep breath, the cool valley air filling my lungs, carrying with it the scent of pine and earth. I felt a wave of calm wash over me, the weight of the past, the inheritance, the confrontation, all balancing out in this moment of quiet triumph. The officers stepped back, allowing me space, and Karen shrank slightly, trying to regain control over a situation that was no longer hers to command. I could almost hear my grandfather's voice whispering through the valley, steady, calm, full of that unshakable certainty he had always carried. The deed was in order. The land was mine. The valley recognized that, even if Karen had not. The tension lingered, thick as fog, but the scales had tipped. I had proven my claim, not with anger, not with threats, but with truth and patience. And in that moment, standing on the gravel road, the mist curling around my boots, the cabin waiting up the road, I felt a profound sense of vindication. The valley, the land my grandfather had cherished and protected, was mine to walk, to claim, to honor. Karen stood there, muttering, sputtering, trying to salvage authority from thin air, while I took my first deliberate step toward the gate, toward the cabin, toward my rightful place in the valley. Every step echoed through the gravel. Every breath carried the weight of legacy, and with each one, the confrontation faded, leaving only the truth in its wake. The police officers watched silently, professional and steady, a buffer between authority misused and rightful ownership. Karen's protests were now meaningless, her claims evaporated under the undeniable weight of law and inheritance. I retrieved the key from my pocket, stepping toward the chain on the gate, and for the first time in decades I felt the valley open up before me, not just as land, but as a testament, a living proof of my grandfather's vision and my right to continue it. The deed in the officer's hands had spoken louder than any argument, louder than the threats, louder than the rage of a woman who thought rules and papers could replace truth. And as I reached for the lock, ready to reclaim the road, the fog seemed to part, revealing the path I had walked in memory, in childhood, and now, finally, in reality. The valley belonged to me, and no call, no threat, no false authority could change that. I inserted the key into the chain, hearing it click open. The sound was sharp, final, resonating across the mist and the trees, marking the moment the valley was once again home. Karen stepped back, her authority shattered. The officers exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of professionalism and subtle amusement. And as I pushed the gate open and stepped onto the gravel road that led to the cabin, the realization settled in. The battle was not over, but this confrontation, this moment of escalation, had been decisively won. The valley, patient and enduring, recognized its rightful owner, and I walked forward, carrying the weight of inheritance, memory, and justice toward the place where my grandfather's legacy awaited me. I took a deep breath, feeling the cool, damp air of the valley settle around me like a cloak. The fog curled low over the gravel road, swirling around Karen's feet and the tires of my car, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath along with me. I reached slowly into my coat pocket and pulled out the envelope I had prepared for exactly this moment. The paper inside wasn't just ink on parchment, it was decades of family history, legal authority, and proof that what I claimed as mine was backed not by anger or entitlement, but by law itself. Karen leaned forward, eyes narrowing as if she could somehow see through the envelope to the truth it held. Her fingers twitched around the edge of her clipboard, gripping it like a lifeline. "What are you doing now?" she asked, her voice sharp. But there was a flicker of uncertainty underneath that sharpness. I didn't answer. I simply extended the envelope toward Officer Daniels. His expression remained neutral, trained as any officer's would be, but I could sense his curiosity growing. I felt a strange thrill run through me. Not arrogance, not gloating, but a controlled, patient anticipation. This was the moment all the tension had been building toward, the point where bluff, threat, and aggression would collide with undeniable truth. "Sir," Daniel said cautiously, holding his hand out. I passed the envelope over, feeling its weight in his grasp. He flipped the top flap carefully, sliding out the official county deed, the paper crisp despite its age, the edges slightly worn from being carried and referenced over the years. Behind it was a folded survey map, detailed and precise, showing boundaries that stretched across the valley, labeled with coordinates and markers that only an expert could interpret fully. Karen's eyes widened as the envelope was opened, but she tried to mask it with a scoff, leaning slightly over the officer's shoulder. "This isn't real," she said, her voice tight with tension. This can't prove anything." Officer Daniels ignored her, scanning the documents with the methodical patience of a professional who had seen countless property disputes, but perhaps not one quite like this. His eyes traced the lines of the survey map, following the plots and angles, pausing occasionally to cross-reference them with the deed itself. Every pause increased the tension, each second stretching out so that the fog seemed thicker, the trees closer, the valley itself quieter, as if nature itself was waiting for the verdict. The deed listed the property formally, in legal language so precise it left no room for debate. My grandfather's name was there, inked carefully decades ago, the document stamped and sealed by the county with official insignia. The lines of ownership, the description of the valley, the coordinates that stretched across the very road we stood on, all were meticulously detailed. The survey map showed the boundaries in sharp clarity, marking every tree line, every creek, every rise and fall of the hills. My last name appeared prominently, inherited directly from my grandfather, linking me to every inch of the land. Daniels leaned back slightly, fingers brushing the edge of the map as he considered the implications. The younger officer murmured something under his breath, eyes flicking from the documents to Karen's increasingly flustered face. Karen herself was pale now, her carefully constructed composure cracking under the weight of evidence. I could see her hands tremble slightly, her breath hitching as she tried to find words that would somehow salvage her position, though none came. Finally, Daniels looked up, his eyes meeting Karen's directly. Calm, but firm. "Ma'am," he began slowly, allowing the words to sink in, to carry the weight they deserved. "This valley is his property." The words hung in the fog for a moment, resonating in the quiet air, reverberating through the valley like a bell tolling. The chain of authority Karen had tried to wield dissolved instantly, her claims evaporating under the undeniable clarity of law and documentation. Silence fell, heavy and profound. The kind of silence that only comes when a lie is exposed and truth stands unyielding in its place. Karen's face went from disbelief to shock, her mouth opening and closing without producing a sound. Her eyes darted from the deed to the survey map, back to Daniels, then to me. She seemed unmoored, pale as though the very color had been drained from her, shaking slightly in a combination of fury, panic, and confusion. Her breath came faster, shallow, and for a brief moment, she looked like a woman encountering something she could neither control nor understand. I remained calm, my hands at my sides, my gaze steady. I didn't need to gloat. The truth was doing all the work. The adrenaline that had thrummed in my chest moments before shifted into a quiet, powerful satisfaction. This was the dopamine hit that comes not from revenge, but from the realization that every argument, every confrontation, every moment of self-control had led to this indisputable revelation. Karen's lips quivered, forming words she couldn't quite say aloud. Her clipboard drooped slightly in her hands as she tried to regain composure, to speak, to assert authority, but the words faltered. Officer Daniels folded the deed carefully, returning it to the envelope, then gestured toward the survey map, indicating the plotted boundaries. "All of this," he said quietly, "belongs to him. According to county records and the documentation presented, your HOA does not have authority here." The younger officer scribbled notes, glancing at Karen occasionally, as if to see whether she would protest, argue, or perhaps faint in disbelief. She did none of those things. She simply stared, pale and shaking. Her confidence evaporated under the undeniable clarity of the documents in Daniel's hands. I could feel the tension in the valley shift. Where moments before there had been confrontation, uncertainty, and the threat of conflict, now there was recognition, acceptance, and a subtle, almost imperceptible relief. The valley itself seemed to exhale, the wind rustling through the trees as if acknowledging that the rightful owner had arrived and claimed his place. Karen's posture slumped slightly, shoulders dropping, the defiance replaced with confusion and perhaps a hint of fear. Her eyes flicked from me to the deed to Daniels, and back again, trying to make sense of how everything she thought she controlled had been upended in a matter of moments. I could almost see the gears turning in her head, futilely searching for an angle, a loophole, a way to reclaim what she had imagined was hers to enforce. The fog hung heavy around us, the gravel underfoot muted by the sudden calm that settled over the scene. The distant creek gurgled softly, birds called intermittently, and for the first time in decades, the valley felt like it was acknowledging its true owner. I felt a surge of clarity, of purpose, and a profound connection to the man who had worked, fought, and cherished this land before me. The deed and survey map had done more than prove ownership. They had validated every memory, every story, every summer spent exploring this valley with my grandfather. They had turned decades of experience, of stewardship, into undeniable fact. Karen's attempt to wield authority, to challenge me, to assert control over this place that had never been hers, was undone entirely by the weight of legal truth. Her lips parted again, forming the beginnings of a protest, but Daniels raised a hand gently. "There's nothing more to discuss," he said. "The property belongs to him. You have no jurisdiction here." The words hit her like a wave. She stepped back, shaking slightly, eyes wide, processing what had just been laid bare before her. The mask of authority, of certainty, that she had worn so confidently just moments ago had melted entirely. I could see the panic, the confusion, the faint glimmer of disbelief in her eyes as she tried to reconcile her self-image with the incontrovertible facts presented in front of her. For me, the sensation was electric and grounding all at once. The valley, my inheritance, the legacy of my grandfather. It was mine, and here, in the misty quiet of a road that had known my footsteps as a child, under the watchful eyes of the officers, and before a woman who had so desperately clung to imagined authority, the truth had finally been recognized. The fog seemed lighter now, curling lazily around the trees, the gravel, the cabin in the distance. The sunlight, filtered through the mist, highlighted the contours of the hills, the edges of the creek, and the outline of the cabin that had waited for decades for this moment of recognition. Karen's presence shrank in that light, her authority nullified, her confidence shattered, her face pale and trembling as she finally understood the reality she could no longer deny. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice. I simply stood tall, shoulders squared, breathing in the crisp valley air, feeling the weight of history and inheritance settle on me with a clarity I had never experienced before. This was my land. This was my home. And the deed, the survey, the legal proof, they had ensured that no threat, no false claim, no misplaced authority could ever take it from me. Karen's attempts to assert control were now meaningless. Her shouts, her threats, her indignation, all faded into the mist. The officers returned their attention to their notes, nodding in quiet acknowledgement of the legitimacy of the documents I had presented. And as I glanced at the valley stretching out before me, hills rising and falling like waves frozen in time, creek glinting faintly in the filtered light, and the cabin waiting patiently in the distance, I felt the profound weight and exhilaration of victory. This was the turning point. The deed had spoken. The valley had recognized its rightful owner. Karen's confusion and pale, shaking face were proof of the power of truth over arrogance, patience over bluster, and legacy over momentary authority. The fog swirled around us one last time, the silence thick but comforting, and I knew with absolute certainty that the valley, the land my grandfather had loved and preserved, had finally found its rightful custodian. I slid the deed back into the envelope, carefully folding the survey map atop it. Daniels gave me a nod, the kind that conveyed acknowledgement without need for words. Karen remained frozen, unable to form coherent sentences. Her claims evaporated in the face of the undeniable reality. And as I stepped forward, toward the gate, toward the cabin, toward the land that had waited for me across decades, I felt a surge of clarity and triumph unlike anything I had ever experienced. The valley was mine. The legacy was mine. And nothing, not a locked gate, not an angry HOA representative, not even the fog itself, could take it away. Karen's face went from pale and shocked to red-hot fury in a matter of seconds. I could see it in the twitch of her jaw, the flare of her nostrils, the way her fingers gripped the clipboard so tightly that the paper almost crumpled. Her eyes darted between me, the officers, and the deed and survey map in Daniel's hands, trying to make sense of what she had just witnessed. But nothing she saw fit her narrative. Her authority, the one she had wielded so confidently before, had evaporated like mist in the morning sun. This cannot be real," she shouted, voice cracking as the fog carried her words across the valley road. Her gestures became more animated, arms flailing as though she could physically push the truth back into the envelope. "This deed, this survey. It's fake. A forgery. You cannot own this land. You can't." Officer Daniels, calm and professional, raised a hand in a gesture meant to defuse the situation. "Ma'am, I need you to remain calm," he said. His voice was measured, neutral, carrying the authority of law without arrogance. "I've reviewed the documentation. It is valid. According to the county records, the land is his property." Karen's eyes widened, disbelief contorting her face. That doesn't matter. The HOA still has authority. I manage access here. I enforce rules. She spun slightly, gesturing wildly at the gate, at the gravel road, at the valley itself. "I regulate this property. It's under HOA jurisdiction." The young officer, notebook in hand, glanced at Daniels with a mix of curiosity and disbelief. Daniels, unshaken, looked back at Karen with the same quiet firmness that had guided him through every dispute he'd ever handled. "Ma'am," he said, tone soft but unmistakably final, "your HOA does not own this land. The deed is clear. The survey is clear. You have been trespassing on property that is legally owned by this gentleman." For a moment, there was a stunned silence. Karen's mouth opened, closed, and opened again, but no coherent words came out. Her hands, still gripping the clipboard, shook with the effort of maintaining control over a situation that was no longer hers to command. Her authority had been reversed. Where moments before she had been the arbiter of rules and fines, she was now the problem, the disruptor, the one whose claims were baseless in the eyes of law. "No," she finally cried, voice high-pitched and urgent, cutting through the fog. "You don't understand. You can't just... These papers could be forged. I demand to speak to a supervisor. I demand verification from my HOA board immediately. This cannot stand. I will not allow this." Her words tumbled over each other, panic creeping into her tone. She was grasping at straws, pulling at the edges of control she had believed she possessed. The confident, commanding woman who had blocked my car and waved violation notices now seemed small, vulnerable, and desperate. The power dynamic had shifted completely. Daniels remained composed. "Ma'am," he said again, calm and deliberate, "there is no dispute here. The documentation is verified. The county confirms the property belongs to him. Your HOA does not have jurisdiction over this land. You have no authority here." Karen's lips pressed together, her face reddening further. She tried to open her mouth, to protest, to insist, but the words faltered. Her hands trembled now, the clipboard wavering in her grip. The anger that had powered her before was now tinged with panic, her previous certainty crumbling into confusion and frustration. She jabbed a finger at me, voice shaking. "This is impossible. I manage the HOA. I enforce the rules. I am responsible for this valley. This cannot override the HOA." I stayed calm, my arms relaxed at my sides, my gaze steady. I didn't need to argue. I didn't need to raise my voice. The deed and survey map had done all the talking. I could feel the energy in the valley shift, the tension crackling around us like electricity. But now it was mine to command. Karen's fury only amplified the sense of vindication, the reversal of power, the undeniable satisfaction that comes when the truth finally overcomes arrogance. Daniels folded the deed carefully, sliding it back into the envelope, then glanced at Karen with a firm look. "Ma'am," he said, voice unyielding, "your HOA has no legal authority here. You've been trespassing by attempting to block lawful access to this property. This is not a matter for debate." The words hit her like a physical blow. Her shoulders slumped slightly, her arms dropping a fraction, the clipboard no longer a weapon but a flimsy shield. Her eyes darted back to the survey map on the hood of the car, tracing the plotted boundaries, the clearly marked coordinates, my last name printed boldly alongside my grandfather's. There was no denying it. No loophole, no clever wording, no HOA policy could override the legal reality in front of her. I, she began, voice breaking, then stopped. The sentence dissolved into a frustrated huff. She shook her head violently, trying to shake off the reality she could no longer escape. Her authority, her confidence, her sense of control, all gone. The table had turned, and now she was the one whose credibility was shattered. The younger officer scribbled something quickly, then glanced at Daniels. "She's not going to take this well," he muttered. Daniels nodded slightly. "She'll have to come to terms with it. There's nothing more to enforce from her side." Karen's breathing was rapid now, shallow, almost panicked. She waved her arms again, gesturing wildly. "I will call the board. I will call someone. You cannot. This deed, this property, you don't." Daniels cut her off, voice low but firm. "Ma'am, there is no one to call that will change the fact that this property belongs to him. You are no longer in a position to assert authority over this land." Her eyes widened further, disbelief mingling with desperation. She stumbled back a step, then another, her confident stance replaced with an unsteady, trembling posture. The fog seemed thicker now, curling around her feet as if mirroring her confusion, her panic, her loss of control. She looked at me, her gaze wild, as if she expected me to shrink under her fury. But I didn't. I stood tall, calm, unwavering, the weight of decades of family history, legal documentation, and memory pressing firmly behind me. Karen's voice rose one last time, high and trembling. This is not fair. I enforce rules. I manage access. This is illegal." Daniel's expression didn't change. "The only illegal action here is your attempt to block lawful access. The property belongs to him. You have no jurisdiction." The reality of the situation began to settle in. Her hands trembled at her sides, no longer wielding the clipboard as a weapon, no longer a symbol of false authority. Her face was pale, her breathing erratic, her mind racing for a solution that didn't exist. Where she had been the enforcer of rules and authority, she was now the problem. Where she had sought to intimidate, she was now powerless. I could see the audience in this moment. if there had been one. The satisfaction, the dopamine hit, the emotional release that comes from watching someone who has been arrogant and self-righteous confronted with undeniable truth. Karen's meltdown was complete, her voice faltering, her confidence evaporating, her previous claims rendered meaningless. It was a turning point. The valley itself seemed to recognize it. The fog shifted, the creek murmured faintly in the distance, and the trees leaned slightly as if bearing witness to the reversal of power. The officers stood steady, acting as anchors of reason in the middle of the chaos. Karen's energy had become unstable, reactive, unproductive. She jabbed her finger once more, then hesitated, realizing that it had no effect. I finally spoke, calm and measured, letting the words carry the weight of truth without aggression. "Ma'am, this land has been in my family for decades. My grandfather built it, my family maintained it, and the deed confirms my ownership. The HOA rules do not apply here. Your attempt to assert authority was invalid from the start." Karen's face turned an even paler shade, lips pressed tightly together as if she were trying to chew her words into something coherent. She shook her head slowly, almost mechanically, muttering under her breath. This isn't over. It can't be." Daniels interrupted gently, but firmly. "Yes, it is. This is settled. You have no jurisdiction. You are no longer authorized to enforce HOA rules here." The finality of his words seemed to break something inside her. Her arms dropped fully to her sides, the clipboard sagging helplessly. Her lips parted in disbelief, her eyes wide and unblinking, staring at the documents, at the survey, at me. The power that she had clung to so desperately had been stripped away entirely. And for me, standing in the valley, surrounded by the mist, the trees, the gravel road, and the distant glint of the cabin waiting up the road, I felt the profound satisfaction of justice, of truth, of rightful ownership prevailing. Karen was no longer the enforcer. She was the problem. She was the one floundering, exposed, powerless. The tension that had built over hours, days, even decades, now dissipated into a sense of quiet triumph. The valley itself seemed to exhale, the wind rustling gently through the leaves as if acknowledging that the rightful custodian had arrived. Karen remained frozen in place, shaking slightly, face pale, her meltdown complete, while I took a slow, deliberate step forward, reclaiming not just the road, not just the land, but the moral and emotional ground that had always belonged to me. This was the peak, the emotional climax, the moment when the tables turned and the audience, if they were watching, would feel that sweet, undeniable satisfaction of truth prevailing over arrogance, patience over bluster, and rightful ownership finally being recognized. Karen had exploded, lost control, and in doing so, confirmed the validity of every argument, every step, every piece of evidence that had led to this moment. I felt a deep, quiet sense of accomplishment. The deed had spoken. The survey had spoken. And Karen, for all her fury, her threats, her imagined authority, had no words left to argue against it. She was defeated not by force, not by anger, but by undeniable truth. And as I stepped closer to the gate, ready to reclaim the path to the cabin, I felt the valley welcoming me back, not just as a visitor, not just as a claimant, but as the rightful owner, carrying forward a legacy that had endured and would continue to endure for generations. The chill in the morning air bit at my cheeks as I stepped closer to the old iron gate that marked the entrance to the valley. It had been years since I last walked this path, yet every detail came rushing back, vivid and sharp. The gravel crunched under my boots in that familiar rhythm, the kind that had once guided me as a child through summers of adventure and discovery. Beyond the gate, the valley stretched out like a living painting, rolling hills, scattered clusters of trees, and the glint of the creek catching the early sunlight. It was as if time had paused here, preserving the memories of decades past, waiting for the rightful heir to return. Karen stood behind me, still fuming, her hands gripping her clipboard as if it were a shield. The realization that the authority she had clung to so desperately had no weight here seemed to have broken something inside her. She was still shouting, still trying to assert her imagined power, but the sound was weak, faltering, like a storm that had spent itself. Her words no longer carried the intimidation they had moments ago, and in the silence that surrounded the valley, they sounded almost absurd. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the key in my hand. This was not just a gate. It was a threshold between the life my grandfather had built, the memories I had cherished, and the future I was stepping into. I could feel the history in the metal, the worn grooves in the lock, the faint scent of rust and earth mingling in the cool morning air. It was a tactile connection to the past, a physical link to the man who had fought, labored, and dreamed for this valley long before I was born. With deliberate care, I inserted the key into the lock. The mechanism turned smoothly, a satisfying click echoing across the stillness. The chain fell away in a small, metallic clatter, and for a moment the sound seemed to resonate with the valley itself, as though the land was acknowledging its rightful owner. Karen flinched, stepping back instinctively, her eyes wide as if the motion of unlocking a simple gate was some act of defiance she could not comprehend. I pushed the gate open slowly, the hinges groaning softly under the motion. Beyond it, the valley lay in quiet majesty, sun glinting off the creek, the wind rustling the leaves in a gentle symphony. It was more than land. It was a repository of memory, a living canvas of the life my grandfather had nurtured, a space that had witnessed decades of laughter, struggle, and growth. Every blade of grass, every tree, every stone felt alive with history, waiting for me to walk among it once again. Stepping through the gate, I felt the weight of all those memories settle around me. The gravel beneath my boots gave way to softer soil as I followed the winding path toward the cabin, my gaze sweeping across the hills that had once seemed endless when I was a child. The valley seemed larger now, more imposing and yet more welcoming, as if it had recognized my presence and was guiding me back to my place. I inhaled deeply, letting the crisp air fill my lungs, carrying with it the scent of pine, damp earth, and the faint, lingering trace of fires long extinguished but not forgotten. Karen's voice drifted toward me from behind, strained and trembling. You can't just... This is whole land. You have no right." I didn't respond. There was no need. The truth had already been spoken through the deed, the survey, the officer's confirmation. Her words were empty, a hollow echo against the reality of ownership. Every step I took into the valley reinforced the reversal of power, the undeniable fact that I was where I belonged. The air felt charged, alive with the energy of justice and patience, a tangible sense of vindication settling around me like sunlight breaking through the morning fog. As I approached the cabin, its wooden facade greeted me like an old friend. The boards, slightly warped with age, creaked under the weight of history and memory. The porch, where my grandfather had once stood teaching me about the valley, the stars, the flow of the creek, seemed to beckon me forward. I could almost hear his voice carried faintly on the breeze, calm, patient, authoritative, reminding me of the lessons he had imparted decades ago. I reached out to the door, fingers brushing over the worn wood, tracing the grooves that had been carved not just by tools, but by time and life itself. Inside, the cabin was just as I remembered, the furniture slightly aged, the shelves heavy with books, the counters marked by years of shared meals and stories. Every corner, every object, every subtle detail carried a memory, a piece of the legacy my grandfather had entrusted to me. It was more than a home, it was a tangible connection to the past, a living testament to perseverance, love, and stewardship. Standing there, I allowed myself a brief moment to absorb it all. The valley, the cabin, the creek, the hills, the trees, they were mine. Mine to protect, mine to honor, mine to inhabit. The realization brought a sense of profound satisfaction, the kind that comes not from winning a fight, but from reclaiming what has always been rightfully yours. Karen's failed attempts at authority, her meltdown, her futile protests, they all faded into the background. They were inconsequential, compared to the weight of inheritance and the affirmation of truth. I paused on the porch, looking out over the valley. The sun had begun to rise higher, casting long shadows across the hills, illuminating the creek in shimmering streaks of gold. Birds called in the distance, the rustle of leaves creating a soft, continuous symphony. The valley was alive, vibrant, welcoming me back into its fold. I felt the culmination of decades of family history, memory, and labor converge in that singular moment. Every hardship, every confrontation, every paper and survey had led to this point. The moral of the experience became clear in that stillness: never assume, never take appearances for granted, and always know your rights. Karen had assumed authority based on her position within the HOA, on her perception of control, on the power she believed she wielded. She had ignored the documents, the legal facts, the lineage of ownership. But paper beats power every time. The law, the records, the truth, they carry weight far beyond bluster, threat, or intimidation. And when that truth is wielded correctly, when patience and knowledge are combined with preparation, it is unstoppable. I stepped fully into the valley, letting the path guide me toward the cabin, toward the memories that had shaped my life, toward the legacy that I was now responsible for maintaining. Karen's protests faded further behind me, insignificant against the expanse of history and law that surrounded me. Every step was a reaffirmation of ownership, a quiet assertion of justice, a declaration that what belonged to my family could not be disputed by arrogance or ignorance. As I reached the cabin, I paused once more to look back at the gate. Karen was still standing there, clipboard in hand, face a mixture of anger and disbelief, still trying to reconcile the reality she could not change. I allowed myself a small, knowing smile. She had thought she had the upper hand. She had thought she could intimidate, manipulate, or enforce control. But in the end, she had been standing on my land the entire time. The valley stretched out behind her and before me, timeless, unyielding, and patient. It had waited for the rightful heir, and now it had been acknowledged. I could feel the weight of responsibility settle comfortably on my shoulders, the kind of weight that carries honor and purpose rather than burden. This land, these hills, this creek, this cabin, they were not just property. They were a living legacy, a connection to the past, and a guide for the future. And yet, in the quiet triumph, there was a lingering awareness that this was only part of the story. Karen's authority had been dismantled, her confidence shattered, her meltdown complete. But she had not disappeared. She had not surrendered entirely. Her misunderstanding of power and ownership might have led her to retreat. But history teaches us that those who are unaccustomed to being denied authority rarely accept it quietly. A part of me, the part still alert, still cautious, recognized that this confrontation might not be the last. The valley, calm and serene in the morning light, was mine. But the lessons learned, the strategies employed, and the patience exercised would be necessary again if she tried to challenge this reality in the future. Knowledge of rights, preparation, and unwavering calm had won the day, but vigilance would ensure that it remained so. For now, though, I allowed myself to fully enter the cabin, letting the door close behind me with a soft, definitive click. The interior welcomed me with the scent of aged wood, the faint trace of smoke from the old fireplace, and the comforting weight of decades of memory. Each item, each surface, each corner was a reminder that this was more than land. It was inheritance, responsibility, and connection. The valley outside shimmered in the morning light, the creek reflecting gold and silver streaks, the hills rolling gently as the wind moved through them. Birds called intermittently, the soft symphony of nature reminding me that life here continued, uninterrupted by the chaos of confrontation, the misplaced authority of someone who had misunderstood her place. I could almost hear my grandfather's voice in the wind, calm and steady, approving, a quiet echo of all he had done to protect and cherish this land. The final lesson was clear: never assume, always know your rights, and remember that true authority comes from truth and preparation, not from position or intimidation. Paper beats power. Facts outweigh bluster. Patience and knowledge are stronger than anger and entitlement. As I stood in the cabin, looking out over the valley, a small, quiet thought crossed my mind. What she didn't know was that this wouldn't be the last time she tried. Authority, after all, can be persistent, misguided, and relentless. But so is truth. And so am I. For now, though, the gate was unlocked. The valley was mine, the legacy intact, and the path forward clear. The confrontation had ended, the moral had been established, and the valley, patient, enduring, and alive, had finally welcomed me back as its rightful custodian. Every step I took further into the hills, every glance at the cabin, every breath of crisp valley air was a reaffirmation of that truth, a quiet celebration of inheritance, and a steadfast promise to protect, cherish, and honor the land that had been entrusted to me. The fog lifted slightly, revealing the expanse in greater clarity, and I allowed myself a final, steadying breath. The journey through confrontation, proof, and vindication had reached its apex. I was here, fully present in the valley, the rightful heir, and the keeper of a legacy that stretched beyond myself, anchored in law, memory, and unshakable truth. The cabin, the hills, the creek, and the trees had all waited patiently for this moment, and now it was mine to walk forward, fully, with purpose and pride, knowing that some battles are won not with anger, but with clarity, preparation, and the courage to claim what is rightfully yours.